From the war zone to Washington, tonight there is a lot of movement. Hamas is urging Egypt to keep open the Rafa crossing so that injured Palestinians can get out and aid can be brought in. It comes after several fuel trucks were allowed into the Gaza Strip today. Meanwhile, President Biden could be headed to Israel after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu extended the invite. On Capitol Hill, Senator Chuck Schumer is asking Congress to pass an aid package for Israel. A lot to get to tonight, so joining me to discuss is Lester Munson, co-head of the international practice at the government relation firm BGR Group. Lester, good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Shana. Great to be with you.
So if the president does visit Israel right now, it would be extraordinary for a number of reasons. So first, could you explain what that would look like logistically? And second, what kind of message would that send to the rest of the world?
Well, first, I think it would send a really important message that the U.S. stands with Israel. And as New York Mayor Eric Adams said so eloquently just a few days ago, President Biden would be saying, your fight is our fight. The things that have happened to Israelis in the last few days are the things that happened to Americans on 9/11. I think a lot of folks in the United States can identify with what happened with Israel. I expect the actual visit of President Biden, should it happen, I think it would be a very good idea if it did. If it did happen, would be a short but very significant symbolically visit. You'd no doubt see a lot of security. You see him meeting with the Prime Minister and the President of Israel, perhaps with the War Cabinet. Notably, our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is with the War Cabinet in Israel, I believe, right now as we're speaking. So I think it would just be a further symbol of U.S. support for Israel in these very difficult times.
At the same time, could it also be potentially risky? Does it send a potentially problematic message when we're seeing some of the humanitarian crises on the ground, the Palestinian people suffering and who could inevitably be killed or at least harmed by some of these airstrikes? Would that potential meeting with Netanyahu send a possibly problematic message as well?
Look, there's no question that there are people who are taking the side of the Palestinians to the extent you have to choose sides here. There's no doubt about that. I don't think President Biden's visit is going to change their mind necessarily. But I would just remind folks, Hamas continues to attack Israel from civilian centers. Hamas is launching missiles from civilian areas in Gaza against Israelis. So it is Hamas that has decided these civilian centers are going to be the battlefield. I certainly hope, as I think everyone does, that the state of Israel uses very great discretion in what they do in the coming days. I am sure that is true for everyone. But realistically here, Hamas has chosen the battlefield. They committed terrorist acts. They're the ones choosing to hide behind civilians in Gaza right now. So I think the responsibility for the situation really lies with them, not with Israel. I think President Biden will basically say things to that effect, and I hope he does.
Yeah. And you mentioned the coming days. At this point, we are still reporting this as the possible ground invasion that many people do expect to happen. We've seen Israeli troops being amassed around the borders. People are being ordered to evacuate from some of the vulnerable areas. At this point, do you think there's any world in which there is not an Israeli invasion on the ground in the Gaza Strip?
It certainly seems very likely that there's going to be some action on the ground. I don't know how Israel accomplishes its goals of eliminating Hamas without being there on the ground. However, never say never. This is war. It's very foolish, I think, to make predictions in times of war. We don't know how this is going to play out. So I think we need to reserve judgment until we see what's actually happening. But it does seem very likely that there's going to be some sort of ground activity from Israel in Gaza. Hopefully it is done in a way that reduces as much as possible damage to innocent civilians. And I think that's going to be the case, and I certainly hope it is.
Yeah. Hamas is asking Egypt to open the Rafa crossing into Gaza. Egypt has been hesitant to do that. Can you explain why?
Well, I think Egypt is worried about its own security. There are a number of radical elements inside Hamas. If Egypt allows them into its country, they are going to make trouble there. Egypt is well aware of that. I don't know that they're going to say that out loud for fear of looking like they're the same as the Israelis. And for political reasons and geopolitical reasons, they don't want to do that. But that it's basically the same concern that Israel has. In fact, it's the same concern that every country has, is that these radical Palestinian terrorists if they are given refuge in their country, are going to cause trouble there. I think that is why.
And how should we be thinking about what those radicals are doing right now? While the rest of the world is anticipating this ground invasion, they surely are as well. So is there an expectation that the majority of these Hamas leaders are still even in the Gaza Strip?
Well, some of them are getting refuge in Qatar, a country quite some distance from the fight, but they're in the Middle East. And again, Hamas continues to attack Israel today. It continues to launch missiles into civilian centers in Israel. It is attacking innocent civilians right now. So this war has continued to be prosecuted by Hamas. It is, and Israel, no doubt, is again, foolish to make predictions, but seemingly getting ready to move against those elements in Gaza. How much will Hamas hide behind innocent civilians? I think remains to be seen. I suspect they're going to continue that. They've been doing that for a long time. So this war, while we're waiting for certain things to happen, this war is actually ongoing right now, and attacks are happening right now. The sooner Israel responds, really, the sooner this is going to end.
And without asking you to make too many more predictions, I do wonder, what do you expect in the coming days or even months? You know, I'm thinking back to last year when Russia invaded Ukraine, and the consensus seemed to be this won't last very long. And here we are, a year and a half later, that's still going on. What do you expect to see in Israel and in Gaza going forward?
Well, Israel has said they are not interested in occupying Gaza. There have not been Israeli forces in Gaza for something like 15, 16 years. So it's been a long time since Israel was there. They are not interested in a permanent presence there. I suspect they're going to go in and eliminate as much of Hamas as they can. It's probably impossible to eliminate every single person involved with Hamas. That may not be practical, but essentially eliminating Hamas's leadership, eliminating its ability to launch attacks against Israelis is really the critical thing. So going after weapons, going after the infrastructure of terror there in Gaza is really the most important thing. And how long is that going to take? I don't know. Will it take a month? Will it take 3 months? Very unclear. I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that question.
Right.
But my guess is Israel's not going to want to stay there much longer than it absolutely has to.
Absolutely. Lester Munson, co-head of the international practice at BGR Group. Thanks for joining us today, Lester.
Thank you.